What's going on everyone, 2am here, and today we'll be creating this male character body. Very similar to the female body process, we're gonna do a quick block out of the character, then we're gonna go into sculpt mode to create details, and then we're gonna do a final retopology. The end result is something that you commonly see in the anime main protagonist. You know, lean, a decent amount of muscle, but not too jacked. And it's not too detailed, but it's a good amount of detail for, let's say, game engines. Alright, so step one is a block out phase, but before we do that, let's go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, search for something called Auto Mirror and make sure it's checked. This should come with Blender and it's a very useful tool for modeling. Now let's start from scratch and press Shift A, Mesh, Cube to add a cube. And on the right side, there's a vertical Edit Mode tab, which should have the Auto Mirror button. Just click it, you don't have to change any settings, and that will split our cube into half and add the mirror modifier. This is going to be the torso. Now let's go over to the side, which is the x-axis, and shrink it down, sideways actually, because we're going to try to get the size of the side of the torso there. Now I'm going to create some loop cuts with Control R. One along the x-axis, one along the z-axis, and move that closer to the middle, because that's where the neck is going to be at the top. Then one more on the x-axis for a shoulder socket. Also a good idea to toggle on X-ray here so that we can select all of the vertices behind when we make a selection. Now select these two and press E to extrude along the Z-axis. So you just press E and then Z to scale it along the Z-axis only. Let's move these up a bit because these are the neck trapezius muscles. And now we can extrude out the arms by selecting those two and extruding out to the side. I scaled the arms down at the end by pressing S and Z so that I only scale them along the Z axis. Let's use G grab and R rotate to get this into place. For this model, we're going to do A pose because I think that's superior to T pose, but you can do whatever you want in terms of arms. I'm just going to taper off the torso here, make it smaller around the waist, and align all the vertices. And guys, remember, this is just a block out, which gets the general shape of the upper torso, so it doesn't exactly have to be like this. I'm just showing you how to do it with a very small amount of cuts. So now we also have to do a waist area, so I'm going to create another loop cut around here, which will separate the upper from the lower torso. And also, now we can take these two and extrude them to create the legs. We can move these single points to create the curves that we want. And I'm going to scale down the bottom 2 points of the legs here along the x-axis. We'll worry about how thick it is from the x perspective later. Now let's create more loop cuts around the knees. And one for the meat around the thighs and one for the meat around the calves. And I'm still scaling them only along one axis so that on the side, the sizes stay the same. And now we just try to get the silhouette right. We try to get the basic proportions correct. And once we're happy with the general shape of this, let's add a subdivision surface modifier. It's gonna look weird, but we just right click, shade smooth, tab back into edit mode, select the end of the arm, press Shift E and drag to the right. Same with the bottom of the legs. Same thing with the neck, Shift E, drag to the right, which will create a crease of 1, which is basically telling Blender at these edges, don't do any subdivision surface modifier. I also did it on the shoulders and the bottom of the arms to create a more angular look. From the front, we're getting there, but from the side, it's flat. So let's work on that now. Select the 4 vertices of the knee and press Ctrl B to bevel. Select the inner 4 corners of the knee and push that out a bit. Ctrl R to make a loop cut on the middle of the knee and drag in these points to get that knee bend. Now I'm gonna drag the bottom of the leg, scale it down on all axes. This creates the bottom of the leg and the calf. Now we have to adjust it because that calf is looking pretty skinny. And we'll also have to create some supporting loop cuts because the bottom half of the calf is a little more thin than the top half. Now select the vertices surrounding the gluteus, grab that cake and bring it a little back until you're satisfied with the size. And now we just need to worry about the size of the upper torso by bringing these 4 vertices backwards. We can also work on the neck a little more at this point. Toggle on X-ray, select these and drag them up and to create a loop cut in between. Choke this out a bit. That will create the neck area. The good thing too about the auto mirror add-on is that it locks in the vertices that are in the middle in place. All right, we're slowly getting there. We just need to work on the upper torso a bit more. Let's work on this angle, rotate it a bit and have it poke out. Adjust the neck a little. And we can poke out the torso area by selecting these two vertices and moving them forward. Let's also taper that off at the stomach area there. And that might be protruding a little too much, but we'll fix it. Let's work on these arms now by scaling them along the y-axis and creating some loop cuts around the elbow area. Let's tweak the chest area a little more here. Bring it back in a little. And do the same thing you did for the knee, for the elbow. Control B to bevel. Then work on this area, scale it down, bring it out, and Control R in the middle of it so that you can create this separation between the top and bottom halves of the arm. Now we can bring out the arm a bit more. And that looks very strange, but we can toggle X-ray again and make sure the elbow is in the right place. Let's also work on the angle that we want. Try to get that neutral position. Our goal for this specific example is that everything will be close to a neutral position for the starting pose, so that when it comes time to create the idle poses, we don't have to do much work. And because all of the joints will be at more natural angles, that will mean less deformation when they actually move into the specific action poses. That's just something to keep in mind. One thing we'll also do is create a loop cut around the bicep area. That way we can control the size of the muscle and the bicep here and also tweak the shape of it a bit. Evidently, I'm no master of the male anatomy just yet, so I'm just creating the typical male protagonist body, which is not too muscular. And here's one point I want to stress as well. If your character is just going to be clothed anyways, like fully clothed, then there's no real reason to detail out all the muscles. At most, you just need to get the basic proportion and silhouette. But down the line, we might do a more muscular version as well for those that will actually be showing the muscles of their models. And once the arms and upper torso are taken care of, it's looking almost complete. I just want to make sure that the pelvic tilt is right and that our character is standing up straight. So I'll just select those vertices and put them into place. And one big advantage of blocking out is that you can make major changes very quickly. So the arms here were looking a little small. The shoulders were not broad enough, so we can quickly adjust that. The shape of the legs look weird. The calves are too wide and the thighs are not wide enough. So I'm gonna go ahead and fix that right now. We can actually make the legs bigger in general, more wide. And I will say now that this is a very flexible method. You can also make changes down the road even when we get into our sculpting. So don't worry too much about getting it perfect right away. You can always shape it to what you want it to be by the end of the process. All right, I'm satisfied with this for now. And I'm gonna apply the modifiers before I move on to the next step. Now select the object and go to sculpt mode. Go over to the remesh tab and get a voxel size of probably 0.03 and press remesh. This will flesh out our object and create a bunch of vertices. If it's not at that density, you might want to get it something close to that so that we can have some material to work with in sculpt mode. The edges may be jagged. This is nothing to worry about because we can smooth it out in sculpt mode. Let's just make sure before we sculpt anything to turn on symmetry, mirror X, so that as we make changes, they're always going to be applied to both sides. Now we can use sculpt mode to tweak our mesh even further. The main tools I'll be using are the grab tool. This can pull in or push out certain areas. Honestly, most of the changes will be made using the grab tool. If you don't like how the edges are all jagged and whatnot, and cubey, you can always use the smooth tool. Then you can set it to a little lower strength and just go over all the areas that you want smoothed out. This doesn't really matter in the long run because once we do retopology, it's not going to catch these jagged edges anyway. So I'm not going to worry too obsessively if there are, these pointy edges coming out of, like, for example, the legs. Now we'll create some details, and to do that we can use the draw tool. The draw tool, when you use it, it adds on material on top of the material you have, but if you press Control and use it, then it will do the opposite and instead carve out. So that is how we're going to carve out this neck area, because there's a little recess above the collarbone. And this is a detail that is usually visible even if the character is wearing clothes. So I'm going to make sure that this model will have this feature. So with draw tool, just hold Control, and when you're left click drawing, it will carve out, as you can see. So it will be this area above the chest, below the neck, and it goes out to the sides a little along the trapezius. And then we also can optionally detail out the neck muscles as well. After the draw tool, you can use the smooth and the grab tools to further refine it, because now it's like sticking out a bit, and it did have some very strange looking areas that needed to be smoothed out. And while we're at it, let's deal with this very alien looking like neck and back area. As you can see, there's a mass here that's protruding out, but once we bring it in, it looks a lot more human-like and natural. And that's all we're really trying to do in this step as well. Apart from adding the details, we want to tweak it so that it looks exactly how we want the body to look. Now, probably my character is going to be clothed at all times, but for the sake of this tutorial, let's try to create the pectoral muscles as well. So we can accomplish this with the draw tool as usual. And first, I'm trying to get the correct indentation of the pecs here. So I'll draw a line down the middle, Control draw with the draw tool, and just get the general shape of it. We can create the indentation by carving out using the draw tool, and then we can also use the normal draw to fill in those pec muscles. And they will be very bumpy, but again, you can just smooth it out. And we can also use grab tool here for those large scale changes. Smooth it out. And if you're creating abdominal details, it's the same process as well. You just carve them out with the draw tool so that when it comes time for retopology, you can use these indented areas for the snapping and for the topology. I'm also creating a little detail around the back here for the shoulder blades, because those tend to stick out along with the upper back muscles. Again, these details won't necessarily be seen, but they probably should be included if the character is going to be shirtless. So let's bulk up that shoulder blade and upper back area a little. And I guess you can also create a kind of like bulge here in the crotch area if you ever need that. So this is just simulating if the character was wearing like tight spandex or boxers or whatever. Let's take this opportunity to refine the knees and the legs as well. The knees were kind of bulging out and a little too big, so we've tightened that a little, tightened that angle, and added some more meat to the calves and the thighs from the side view. And all in all, this is our final sculpting result. We do have the basic musculature and form of the male anatomy down. If it's looking a little rough or low polyed around some areas or a little too bumpy in some areas, that's perfectly fine, because this is not the final product anyways. It is just, let's say, kind of a reference for our retopology, which is going to be step 3 coming up. And so in object mode, we're just going to create a new plane, rotate it so that it matches the front of our torso, bring it up in front, and search for the in front option. And in this orange tab, we check in front so that it will always render in front. Let's do auto mirror again because we want this to be reflected on both sides as well. Click this magnet icon to turn on snapping and change it to face nearest. Now this plane object will always snap to our sculpted object. And in edit mode, we just manipulate this plane and create new faces and do our loop cuts until we've covered the entire sculpture. And our goal, of course, seeing as this will probably be a moderately detailed game character, we want to have a medium density of the size of our faces, like so. It's not exactly going to be low poly, but it's still going to be quite efficient. And here we're just using the same modeling repertoire that we used in step 1, which is like extruding, grabbing, and rotating faces. Now, fortunately, the male pecs are much easier to retopologize than female breasts. We just want to make sure that we're following along these lines of the pecs so that it creates those details. So it's going to be the same for the clavicle, neck area as well. Whenever we go to the areas with sculpted details, we make sure it follows the lines that we created. So for the front area, there's not much detail. So we'll just extrude our plane over it and Control R to create loop cuts. But here, around the neck area, we will follow this line so that the final product has this detail around the neck area. For this, we do create a smaller extrusion here, just so it captures this small detail. Don't forget to shade smooth. For now, it's coming out decently. There needs to be a little more definition on the pec area. We can solve this after using crease and after we add our subdivision surface. Here's the neck area. I'm just going to keep it really simple and extrude these points up. And then when it gets to the top, I'm just going to extrude and wrap around these faces until it fully goes around the neck. We can extrude the sides out. And then Control R, loop cut, use the mouse wheel to create more loops. And that solves that side pretty easily. The hard part will be once you have those holes that you have to fill in and then you have to create topology between them. We can accomplish this by extruding single points and then selecting edges and or 4 vertices and pressing F to create a face in between them. So there I could select 2, press F. Make sure this vertex wraps around the armpit. Select those 2, press F. I found this pec area kind of weird how I topologized it, but in any case you can always go back and delete things and then redo it and it will snap back on anyways, so you don't have to worry. Sometimes there will be points like this where you can leave it as a triangle or you can just create an additional loop cut so that it turns it into a quad instead. But if you're adding a subdivision surface modifier on top anyways, it won't matter at this point if you have any triangles because they will just be converted all into quads as well. So to keep it simple, that's what I did here. I just merged them into triangles at that point so that it could continue following the contour of the pec. Let's solve the arms now. Just grab this point and extrude more points along the outside of the arm loop. I merged it down a little because I don't want there to be too many vertices around the arm. It's not necessary. And once that's done, go ahead and select the entire loop and extrude it. Now there might be a little trouble with getting it around and maintaining like even distance between all the points. At that point, you're just gonna have to manually space them out, span them out. And it's very much acceptable to do these long extrusions and then create your loop cuts after. so that it will stick to the original sculpture. Adjust the positions of the vertices so that everything is spanned out nicely and has good positioning. You can create the elbow bevel here, Control B. As you can see, we are getting this weird thing when we try to extrude to the end of the wrist. One solution is to Shift D, duplicate a vertex down to the wrist. I counted how many vertexes are in that loop there, and I actually decided to merge down a bit before doing this step. Looks like I took a break from the arm there because I'm ADD and just worked on the back. Extruded those points out to the middle, then did a loop cut. This part doesn't have to be too dense in faces. There, I just joined those with a face, and then loop cutting easily makes it conform to the shape of the back in the sculpture. Of course, if you want to add those back details like the shoulder blade, you will have to spend a little extra time in that area. So back to this point that we duplicated, we're just going to extrude it and extrude it around the wrist and make sure that the amount of points match our arm edge loop. So we're going to join those and then loop cut one more point, span them out nicely, and then we can select both loops and do bridge edge loops. Now we can loop cut, and that's pretty much all there is to it for the arm. Now we can work on the bottom half of the torso, the pelvis actually. One improvement that I'll have to get back to later is to make it more curved around the hip areas. Like these loops need to curve so that if the legs rotated outwards, then it will be more natural and there will be less pinching. They're going down kind of straight at the moment. Regardless, this is kind of simple. We just have to make sure we create a loop on the bottom of the pelvis. Loop cut around there. And at the bottom, let's extrude out some points that we can connect to the other side. Then let's just create these faces. Actually miscalculated the amount of faces there, so loop cut right there in the taint area so that we can get some nice quads going here. And from there, you've easily achieved your leg edge loop as well. Let's just delete this edge here. We don't need that. Align the leg edge loops and then just extrude it down, create the loop cut. Sometimes you can visibly see that the vertices don't match up to the sculpture. You can drag them out to those areas, or you can create more faces there with more loop cuts so that it catches the detail. Here I decided to merge down into a triangle because after subdivision, as I mentioned earlier, it goes back to being a quad. But this will save overall vertices, because if you merge down at the top of the leg there, then it's gonna save so many vertices as it comes down. And the leg obviously doesn't need that much detail. It is mostly just a cylindrical figure. So here we get to the knees and the calf. We're gonna work out the knee cap later. But let's just extrude down here for now. Loop cut around the calf detailed areas. And that one, this right here is not spanned out very well, as you can see. It's all over the place. We can do the duplicated vertex thing, or we can just span them out at this point. And that should easily extrude all the way down now. Just tweak it when it gets to the bottom as well. Here at the knee area, let's create a loop cut so that it follows the bend of the knee. Let's select these vertices, not the middle, just these 8, so that we can do a Control B bevel. Then we can drag out these areas. We've actually not added a subdivision yet, so let's go ahead and do that. And now we can have more control over those areas that we creased out, including the pec and the neck area. We can also add crease to these areas as well in the upper back. And as you may notice, we turned off snapping so that we can freely edit these points. And at this point, it's just a matter of tweaking it until you are satisfied. You can also go back into sculpt mode and make changes, as I'm doing now.
Alright, so as we're closing this out, we have the male body with some basic features such as the clavicle, the pectoral muscles, and just a general outline of a lean, muscular male character. It's up to you to add more or less detail. You just follow the same steps in the sculpting mode whenever you want to add certain details to, let's say, the abs or the back, or even the arm and leg muscles. You can see the male and female differences here. They're quite obvious. Female anime bodies are usually more curvy and stylized. And let me try to outline some of those details here. So for the male torso, it's either bigger in width or the same size as the bottom half. And then if you notice in anime, usually the neck width is much more pronounced for the male. And then for the females, you of course have this hourglass figure. The bottom half, like the legs and below, usually wider than the torso. As we mentioned earlier, for the chest, sometimes it's good to do this radial topology, whereas for the male pectoral muscles, you can just go with a simple grid. And the female curvature is not only for the upper body, or even just the hips, but also for the legs as well. They tend to have this more bowed feature, whereas male legs tend to be more muscular and straightened. And then in terms of hand anatomy, females' fingers tend to be more elegant and pointy. And so to convert to a male hand, you can simply use the bloat tool in sculpt mode and make it so that fingers are straight instead of contoured. Then you can also add some meat to the top and bottom of them and flesh out the palms a little more. If you've ever played Valorant, you've probably noticed this difference already, that the male's fingers are a little more chunky, whereas the female fingers, they have this contour to them so that they're a little bit pointy at the end. And of course, for males, we usually bring in the fingernails instead of having them protrude out like the female hand. If you've noticed, I've also modeled these hands to be more neutral and relaxed so that they're ready for the idle pose. And they don't have to take on as much deformation as usual. For feet, there's no real big differences. It's just that male feet tend to be bigger and less arched, and more stubby, of course. In any case, that's going to be about it for this video. This male-female difference is just a little bonus. But if the tutorial helped you, please help me out by hitting that like button. Over on my Patreon, I've decided to leave the body file for this tutorial there for free. It's going to be set right at the start of step 2 in case you wanted to practice your retopology. There's also a bunch of helpful files there that you can access for, I think it's just $2. Anyways, that's going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'm out.